Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I am your host, Trevor Scott, joined today by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And we are back together on the mic. This is great. And we're going to be getting into our week 3 quarterback rankings, obviously SuperFlex perspective. So we're going to kind of fly through some of these top guys. If you have one of these guys in SuperFlex, you're obviously starting them. And then we're going to get into some of the more nitty-gritty decisions, maybe, between 12 and 25, because there's going to be a lot of sameness, and overall quarterback play has been atrocious through the first 2 weeks. So there's a lot of disappointment going on. There's a lot of guys that we had high hopes for that have not scored hardly any points. And so hopefully we can kind of talk about matchups and talk about our confidence in some of these guys that are going to be ranked a little lower. So kicking it off, number 1 is Josh Allen. I don't think that's going to surprise anybody. He's going up against Jacksonville. They're a 5.5-point favorite. Deshaun Watson was QB9 against them last week. And Watson has been shaky at best. So the fact that he put up a very solid fantasy performance, even in a game where they only scored 18 points, I think kind of says it all there. A lot of confidence in Allen here. I think they're going to exceed that 5.5-point favorite. I think there's going to be a lot of scoring from Buffalo. I do hope to see in this game maybe one of the receivers or Dalton Kincaid, one of the pass catchers, I should say, kind of distinguish themselves as the number 1 option in the passing game. I hope, we get a 9-10 target game from somebody so that, we can kind of get a little bit of reassurance from Allen from a passing game standpoint, get a little bit of added confidence there. I think it will be good if that player is any of them. But I also think Shakir has kind of been the most consistent through the first 2 weeks with target share and with production. So look for him to have a pretty solid game this week.
All right, moving over to number 2, Lamar Jackson. So Ravens are 0-2 for the first time since 2015. Losing 3 starters on the offensive line has really been more impactful than maybe we wanted to admit in the preseason. He is QB5 through 2 weeks, so no need to panic with him. He's got Dallas this week, who just let Derek Carr hang 23 fantasy points on them. So I would expect in what should be a high-scoring game, hopefully these quarterbacks are going back and forth, and hopefully Lamar continues to run like he has the first couple games.
Yeah, number 3, the first surprise maybe here on our rankings is Kyler Murray. He finishes QB1 last week against the Rams. He had over 50 rushing yards. Obviously, the deep touchdowns to Marvin Harrison Jr. was awesome to see. He did just miss twice more to him on fades. So this could have been an even bigger finish from him. And Marvin Harrison Jr. even came out and said the first thing he said in his press conference was Kyler only had 4 incompletions, and all of them were when targeting Harrison. So they talked about building additional chemistry as they get going here in the season. So I think there's even more room for upside here with Kyler Murray. If you got him in your Superflex leagues, obviously you're thrilled, right? Because you were getting him at the back end of the top 10. We had him ranked at number 8, and I told you this, obviously this week, like, man, I wish I would have had the nerve to rank him a little higher, to rank him in that first tier of quarterbacks, because he's there now. And if you have him, he's obviously locked and loaded.
Number 4, Jalen Hurts. So he's looking like vintage Hurts against the Falcons. Ran the ball for 85 yards. They made it sound like A.J. Brown would miss another week, which limits his passing game ceiling. Jahan Dotson got 1 catch in that game, so he's definitely not it. But I would expect to see some more design runs out of Hurts next week. They do get New Orleans, who apparently are the best team in the NFL right now. So it'll be very interesting to see how they match up against the Saints, because we saw with the Saints week 1, they destroyed the Panthers. We all kind of brushed it off. But when they destroyed Dallas, now we've all kind of got our ears perked up a little bit. So very excited
on
for
the
Hurts
road
in this game.
Too.
I know. It's insane.
All right, and number 5, another guy that maybe you guys are thinking is ranked a little bit too high, but I think it also has a significant amount to do with the matchup against Washington, is Joe Burrow. He had a solid week 2, right? So he is known for getting off to a slow start. Only had like 5 points in week 1, but had 17 in your 4-point passing touchdown leagues last week. So very good performance. Hopefully that's something that we can anticipate relying on a little bit moving forward. And I was really encouraged, even though T. Higgins was out, Mike Gesicki kind of stepped into that role between the 20s, produced a lot of yards on a lot of targets. Obviously, Iosivas was used in the red zone, scored a couple times. So I think overall the offense is working pretty well. Right now, the run game also has been pretty bad overall. So, more on Burrow's plate, more pass attempts coming, Chase getting caught up to speed here. So I think Burrow hopefully is over that early season hump already, gets a really easy matchup here with Washington, who I hope he can kind of stick it to a little bit, and that he can get up in the 23 to 25 point range.
Number 6, CJ Stroud. He's got Minnesota on the road this week. Stroud's been solid in his first 2 games. They won both of those games. No picks thus far, but he's only scored 3 touchdowns through the air. We saw last week Brock Purdy throw for 319 yards against the Vikings, who do have pretty vulnerable secondary. So I would expect big numbers from Stroud here. Mixon is banged up a little bit, so maybe they don't use him quite as heavily. I think with Stroud, what's been really encouraging to see is his rapport with Nico Collins, who maybe not so much anymore is one of the more underrated wide receivers in the NFL. I would expect Tank Dell to get mixed in quite a bit more. I know you talked about him in the trade targets episode. So yeah, expect a big week from CJ here.
Yeah, and Stroud just missed Dell on a 70-yard touchdown. If they had connected on that, Stroud's week would have been massive last 2 weeks. So still a lot of confidence here. He's one of the guys that isn't playing quite as well as we would have hoped. But also Mixon might miss the game. So, if he does, there's no way that Cam Akers or Dameon Pierce are going to be able to take on that workload. So wheels up for Stroud this week. Number 7, Patrick Mahomes. So this is the first guy that is going to appear lower than you would have liked to, having drafted Mahomes very early as a tier 1 quarterback. But he has started off very poorly, right? Only averaging 13 points per game through the first 2, hasn't really needed to do much. Right, he's thrown 2 picks and really should have had another one on a ticky-tack penalty that got one called back. And they gave the opportunity to kind of win the game on a pass interference on 4th and 16 last week. So, there's been some opportunities there. He did hit Rice on a long touchdown, which I thought was good last week. But, he does get the Falcons, and the Falcons defense held up pretty well on Monday night. Obviously, Hurts had 85 rushing and a touchdown, so that didn't matter for Hurts' fantasy performance. But for Mahomes, I am a little bit worried here. Another thing to note, I do think there is upside for him to exceed this ranking now that Isaiah Pacheco is hurt. Their running game just isn't going to be the same without him. So he might be asked to shoulder a little bit more of the burden and get Travis Kelce going in this game.
Moving on to number 8, kind of the opposite of Patrick Mahomes. This guy was drafted quite a bit later. And if you had drafted Baker Mayfield, you are stoked right now. So he's on a complete heater, averaging 24 fantasy points per game. He gets Denver at home this week. Now, Denver has given up the 4th fewest passing yards in the league, but that has a lot to do with teams not having to throw the ball against them because their offense is so bad. And when they do have to throw the ball against them, they've got Pat Surtain on their top receiver. So I think with the trio of receivers that Baker has, and as good as Godwin has looked so far specifically, I think we're going to see another 300 plus yard passing game out of Baker here.
Yeah, the other thing working in Baker's favor, just to add on that, the running game for Tampa Bay has been completely non-existent. They're averaging less than 3 yards a carry from both of their running backs, White and Bucky Irving. So the Broncos are very poor against the run, so maybe they try and get both of those guys going. But if they aren't able to run the ball early, I bet you that they just let Baker kind of cook here. And could be a huge upside again. And Baker, through 2 weeks, is QB1 overall. So again, this might seem a little bit elevated of a ranking, but if you have Baker in your SuperFlex leagues, you are stoked because your team is going to be significantly better than it was coming out of the draft. Dropping down to number 9, we got Brock Purdy. He also very disappointing start to the year. He has not been very good, 10 and 13 points to start. But, he did throw for 319 yards last week. Ayuk is still getting up to speed. He did lose Debo, which is going to hurt him. But I think the matchup with the Rams is going to be something that, he can kind of overcome, get Ayuk going, still has Kittle. Maybe Jordan Mason gets a little bit more involved in the passing game. And Juwan Jennings is very underrated. He was excellent last year down the stretch in the playoffs. And I think he can kind of step up into that wide receiver 2 role and be decently productive, maybe like a 4 for 65 game. But that helps elevate Purdy's floor for this week in this game. Kyler just absolutely lit them up. So I think that Purdy, just inside the top 10, is a pretty fair ranking for this week.
Rounding out the top 10, we got Jaden Daniels. So 13 fantasy points last week after putting up 28 week 1. So a little bit of a disappointment for him. would have expected more against the Giants, to be honest, but he still hasn't thrown a touchdown. So his value will be determined by how much he runs the ball against the Bengals. Bengals have given up the second fewest pass yards in the league, so don't expect him to be getting it done through the air. But their run defense is so bad. I know that's typically against running backs, but I would expect Jaden to be, running all over the place. And I'm excited to watch him in this matchup. I don't think any of the rookie quarterbacks have thrown a touchdown yet, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see if he can be the first one this week.
Yeah, and Daniels is still going to be ranked here based on the upside he displayed in week 1. But if he doesn't perform here after not performing against the Giants, I'm going to be encouraged to drop him precipitously in the rankings going into next week, because his average depth of completion, so not ADOT, but his average depth of completion is 2.5 yards down the field. He is not connecting on anything deep at all. And go look at Terry McLaurin's stat line if you want confirmation bias on that. It's 6 for 22. It's not good through the air. He needs to get the ball down the field, and he has the arm for it. So it's interesting that he just hasn't been able to figure it out yet. Maybe getting Noah Brown a little bit more integrated into the offense is going to help them, but because he was their leading receiver last week. But I think overall, Daniels needs to display a little bit better passing, because otherwise they're just going to run single high and one-on-one on the outside and make him beat them out there. And if he's not able to, that's going to really, really be tough on his fantasy value.
Yeah, he's the one guy in the top 10 that I worry that could have a big time bust of a week here.
Yeah, and like you said, the Bengals rush defense has been terrible. That's why he's here. If he doesn't rush for 70 and a touchdown, he's going to be a disappointment this week. Going to 11, Anthony Richardson, another rushing quarterback who looked horrible last year as a passer, or last week as a passer. Fantasy managers knew what they signed up for, right? It's a big boom in week 1 when he has a lot of rushing, and then nothing when he has hardly any rushing in week 2. The Packers did a pretty good job of keeping him in check, keeping him in the pocket. And Steichen, I don't think, was necessarily fully ready for this game against Malik Willis. I think they kind of just thought they were going to be able to roll the Packers, and they didn't. They were not very good on offense. So this week he gets the Bears. Chicago has been terrible at controlling the ball. They've been the worst offense on a per play basis this year. So, they should be in a decently positive game script. They should be able to get the ball back maybe a little bit more than they've been accustomed to through the first 2 weeks. So that should help raise Richardson's floor a little bit, I should say. And there's a chance he gets Josh Downs back, which I think will be a huge help to the offense.
Yeah, with Richardson, we talked about it a lot during the offseason. You know what you're signing up for, right? It's going to be a roller coaster. He's going to win you some weeks, and he's going to have some dud weeks. So he's kind of going to be one of the hardest guys to rank throughout the rest of the season, but the sky-high ceiling cannot be ignored.
And in SuperFlex, there's zero chance you're benching him. Don't get cute. Just put him in there.
All right, moving on to number 12. Another guy that's been disappointing to start the year, Jared Goff. It's even a little bit more concerning how Goff has started, given how good Jameson Williams has looked. If you had told me that Jameson was going to finally break out and he's going to be catching these deep touchdowns, I would think Jared Goff would be number 5 on the season to date. They do like to run the ball a lot, so that kind of limits his upside, especially when they're in the red zone. But he gets Arizona this week in I believe the highest expected point total of the week. So this could very well turn into a shootout. If Goff does have another down week, he's going to plummet down our rankings, I guarantee you. But for now, in a good matchup, still have him here at 12.
Yeah, and last week on Goff, if you would have told me that he was going to throw 55 times and not get sacked, I would have said he's probably going to be a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah.
Just not working right now. And you said the JMO long touchdowns, right? That's the only touchdown he's thrown this year. So he has not been finding Sam Laporta at all. Sam Laporta has been completely invisible through 2 games. They have to correct that. And Amon-Ra is banged up coming into this game. So hopefully he's able to play and play effectively. But this could be a Laporta game here, and their offense could look a little bit better in the air. So going down to number 13, another guy like Baker that is just flying up the rankings. And if you have him in SuperFlex, you have to make sure you're starting him, is Derek Carr. He's the number 2 quarterback overall in fantasy right now. The New Orleans Saints offense, some people were predicting we're going to be the worst offense in the league before the season started, and now they look like the best offense in the league. They have Olave. Shaheed looks excellent as their number 2 deep threat, kind of like the it feels similar to the Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams kind of balance between the two of those guys. And I really think Alvin Kamara obviously showing out through the first 2 weeks, still cautiously optimistic there. I know some people like just ranking him in the top 5, and I'm not so sure. I have him, in a couple spots, and I have him in our league, and I'm not so sure I'm that confident in him yet. But it is nice to see that he's humming in this offense too, and really helping Derek Carr. Took a screen pass, 57 yards for a touchdown, right? All these guys can run after the catch. So, and then you couple that with the fact that he's going against Philly, who just got torched by Kirk Cousins for 250 and 2 touchdowns, and they just are a sieve on the back end still. Maybe the rookies get a little bit better as the season goes on, but for now, take advantage of this matchup.
It's funny because in the offseason, we talked a lot about how, the new offensive coordinator would benefit Chris Olave, how the addition of Talise Fuaga would, benefit their run game. But I did not expect it to be like this. I was expecting like some small boosts and some better efficiency, but this is just, it's hilarious. And I couldn't even imagine. I'm sure there's some SuperFlex teams out there that went 0 QB and drafted Derek Carr with Baker Mayfield that are now just like, dominating their leagues. So it's just, and I don't know. I did not expect this.
In the preseason too. That's why we say pick your guys down low. And if you have a guy you like, then wait at quarterback, right? Because if you had waited, even if you took one high and you ended up with Carr, you could have ended up with Baker and Carr, both going outside the top 24 quarterbacks in ADP. So, these guys are looking very good right now.
All right, number 14, Dak Prescott. Disappointing start of the year for Dak. It's kind of been a little bit tough to judge because they won one game by 16. They lost the other game by 25. Cowboys are a 1-point underdog at home versus the Ravens with an over-under that's pushing 50 points. The Ravens have given up the most passing yards in the league, so I would expect Dak to attack this defense through the air. We still see kind of that back and forth with the run game between Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott, and neither of whom have been extremely inspiring. So I would expect Dak to be throwing quite a bit. And there's a good chance that Jake Ferguson is back, is kind of his safety blanket, and especially a solid end zone target for him.
Yeah. And for Dak, like I have him a couple spots. I ranked him at 7. He better do well here. He has been bad, and he's like QB 17 on the year, I think, or something like that. But if he doesn't show out here a little bit more, there's going to be calls for McCarthy. They're not doing well overall as a team, obviously. So everybody's going to be looking at Dak here to step up and really have a good game against the Ravens. Number 15, Geno Smith. This is another guy that you could have drafted really late in your Superflex leagues. That is for sure getting into your starting lineups now after having 17 points last week. He's up at QB8. It's starting to look like the new offensive coordinator, and the new offensive system is going to be very good for him production-wise. JSN went off in this game, kind of establishing himself as the number 2 in the passing game here, which is excellent. That's what you want to see. And they didn't have a lot of success on the ground in this game with Charbonnet, right? He had like 14 carries for 38 yards. So JSN was almost an extension of the running game, where it was just like quick hitters to him constantly at 16 targets. And that's what we want to see for Geno, right? A lot of easy throws, a lot of easy yardage. And he had the deep shot to DK that he hit. So I really am liking Geno here in this spot too against Miami, where they should get the ball a lot, be able to control the clock. Skyler Thompson doesn't, give much confidence. So I do think that he has a chance here to really go off. And I think he could even exceed this 15 ranking by quite a bit. I could see his upside being in the 23, 24, 25 point range.
And I hope it is, because you and I are facing off this week, and I am starting Geno in one of my QB spots. But moving over to number 16, this one is painful. Deshaun Watson, he's looked absolutely awful in his first 2 games. I still think he's going to get benched at some point in the season, probably sooner than later. But this is a matchup against the Giants. This is the only reason that he is ranked this high. If he doesn't perform and beat up on New York, then I think it might be Jameis Winston time very soon.
Yep. And again, this is matchup driven here with the Giants. So unfortunately, we are where we're at with Watson. So going down to number 17, Kirk Cousins, right? He looked much better last week, and I think that was very encouraging. I own Cousins in multiple spots, so I was getting very nervous after that first week. He did not look right. In this game, he looked much better. The late touchdown drive was also awesome to see, right? He got 70 and a touchdown on that drive, so that obviously boosted his numbers in a big way. So hopefully that was a springboard to more production here. I also liked that it seemed like they had additional receiving help. It's not just going to be London, but Ray McLeod was involved over the middle, kind of working out of the slot. And the main guy was Darnell Mooney. Like, he took shots down the field to Mooney. He had 7 targets and he had 3 for 88 and a long touchdown. And also he had one other play that he should have just ran through the ball. And I think Mooney maybe has gotten so used to playing with bad quarterbacks that when he gets tangled up on his route, the quarterback kind of gives up on him. And, instead of that, if, by the time he had broke down his speed and got his head turned around, he realized the ball was on the way and it would have hit him in stride if he had just kept running. And so I think that's going to get cleaned up in the film room. I think Mooney is a very talented player overall. And so I have higher hopes for Cousins, knowing that he's got a weapon that looked pretty good in this matchup in week 2.
Yeah, this was really encouraging to see because, we talked about week 1, how he was taking every snap under center. And I think it was important for the new head coach to understand that and make adjustments. It wasn't just because Kirk was hurt, like I was afraid of. He just looked at the tape and said, hey, this isn't working. Let's go to something that will. And it did. So I think that Cousins is in a very good spot moving forward. He's got Kansas City. We saw Burrow just put up a good fantasy performance against them. So looking forward to see how he plays in this game. And I think everyone was rooting for them outside of the city of Philadelphia on Monday night. So that was a pretty awesome game. Moving over to number 18, very excited to talk about my boy, Sam Darnold. Everyone knew he was going to be QB9 thus far in the season from a fantasy perspective, coming off such an impressive win against the 49ers. I know after week 1, we were all kind of like, all right, well, let's see what he does against San Francisco. San Francisco knows him. They'll probably game plan for him. But he put up 268 with 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, rushed for 32 yards. Obviously, we all saw that 97-yard touchdown to Justin Jefferson. He looks good, and I'm very excited. I know we've seen flashes of Darnold look good in the past before he kind of falls off a cliff, but hopefully O'Connell will keep him in a good place and continue to design plays for Jefferson. He's got Houston this week, decent matchup. Hopefully will be a high-scoring affair. So hopefully he can keep it rolling.
Yeah, and we talked about Darnold in the preseason that, he could come out and look very good through week 1, week 2, and he's immediately going to be a starter in SuperFlex. So that has happened. The ranking would have been a little bit stronger from my perspective if Jefferson didn't have question marks and if Addison wasn't out. I mean, the fact that he did this with Jefferson banged up and with no Addison in this game was phenomenal.
Or Hawkinson.
I
no
honestly,
Hawkinson yet.
Yeah, Hawkinson is still out, right? Like, he put this stat line together and helped them hold on to win without kind of anything really on offense, right? I mean, Aaron Jones fumbled on the goal line too. It's like, I don't know. It's just crazy that he played so well against one of the best defenses in the league. And so from that perspective, I do think that Darnold is going to get pushed up the rankings as we continue to move into the season. Now, he was on my trade targets yesterday. If you can get him, you should be actively trying to pursue him in SuperFlex, because he's somebody that you're going to be able to start. If you have any of these guys that we just talked about here, Deshaun Watson, Kirk Cousins, Gardner Minshew, or you have Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, any of those guys that you drafted probably higher than you would have liked to admit at this point now, try and go get Sam Darnold, because I do think that he's going to be a starter here. Number 19, guy that was drafted very low, but is getting pushed up, I think, with the matchup this week predominantly. And he looked pretty good last week, right? So he's QB 15 on the season. This is Gardner Minshew I'm talking about now. And he gets Carolina, obviously excellent matchup. Herbert didn't do super well because they just torched him on the ground. But the Raiders' ground game has been kind of bad so far. I mean, they are not getting much out of Zamir White, so maybe they try and get him going. Alexander Mattison randomly got the goal line carry last week, but he had 4 carries for 1 yard and a touchdown. So on the ground, he's doing nothing. And obviously, the weapons here are excellent, right? Devontae Adams, Brock Bowers looks awesome. Like another guy I talked about in the video yesterday. And Jacoby Myers is nothing to sneeze at as the number 2 wide receiver. I really like him as a player. Led the team in receiving in week 1 and didn't do so much this week because Devontae Adams went off and Bowers went off. But in a situation when those guys aren't doing so much for from Minshew's perspective, he does have that third option he can lean on, who is a very good player. So I like Minshew this week against this good matchup. And we'll see moving forward if he really gets ranked this high ever again. But I do think that there's something here with Minshew.
And moving on to number 20, this might be a surprise to some folks. We've got Andy Dalton. So Bryce Young was benched after just 2 weeks. So, maybe Dave Canales has the same success with Andy Dalton that he had with Geno and Baker. Dalton did start a game for Carolina last year, and he threw for 361 yards and 2 touchdowns. I know that you and I have talked about this quarterback change quite a bit in elevating the offense as a whole overall.
Yeah, and for Dalton, for me, right, I was the one that kind of pushed him up into the top 20. And every time he's gotten a chance over the last couple of years, he's produced from a fantasy perspective, right? He got a bunch of starts in New Orleans where he was very successful there, right? And he got a start last year where he dropped like 27 fantasy points. And obviously we're not anticipating that. We're just saying that this is something here where he's going to elevate this offense in a big way. We did have high hopes for Bryce Young. I mean, he was getting drafted around QB 22-ish, right? I mean, some people might have taken Young over Baker. And this is an offense that with Canales, like you've been saying constantly about Bryce Young, is that he's helped elevate Geno, he helped elevate Baker, and now he's got his veteran presence here with Andy Dalton, who I do think he's going to elevate as well. He's probably going to throw a lot. Their running game has not been very good. They have not had very much volume. So I do think that they're going to try and get Deontay Johnson going. I think they're going to try and get Xavier Legette going. And so I think overall, this is somebody that you're going to want to start. And again, I have him ranked pretty well here over a lot of these guys we're going to talk about next. So if you are in a 12-team SuperFlex league, you just lost Tua, for example, Dalton is the absolute priority this week for you on the waiver. Number 21, Justin Herbert. This hurts me to have him ranked so low because I was so confident in him in the preseason. But he gets a very difficult matchup here with Pittsburgh. They're playing the ball control game. They're trying to run the ball. And the defense has been very good so far for the Chargers. They have had really, really high levels of success on the ground, which has helped them kind of control the ball. And they haven't really needed Herbert much. They kind of just blew out the Raiders and then really blew out the Panthers. So this week, I do think it's going to be a low scoring game. The over-under has to be really low on this, right? They had a setup with Harbaugh. They had like 7 linemen, the running back and 1 receiver out there, right? So like they're going into very run heavy packages. J.K. Dobbins has looked phenomenal to start the year, just blowing big runs all over the place. And so unfortunately that kind of caps Herbert for right now. I do think that there is a situation where he does start to grow into being that top 12 quarterback that we had hoped for. Quentin Johnston had 2 touchdowns last week, so maybe there's something there. Ladd McConkey will get more involved. So just overall, this is a tough defense, so we have to push him down.
Yeah, and I think, Pittsburgh might come into this selling out to stop the run. So maybe we see a couple of deep shots via play action, but I think Herbert will have to throw more, like you said. So assuming, he can be ultra efficient, I would expect a decent floor here for how low we have him ranked. But yeah, it is painful to have him number 21. And moving on to number 22, Justin Fields, he's presumed to be the starter again in week 3. He's had back-to-back 11-point games, but he had a couple penalties last week that held him back from a much better performance. Hasn't turned the ball over. He's managed the games pretty well. They're running the ball a lot, which is kind of what we expected with Arthur Smith, but he will be one of the lowest volume throwers, but his rushing upside obviously gives him a big boost. So another guy that's going to be hard to rank throughout the season because he can easily put up, 100 on the ground if they've got some design runs for him or some deep scrambles or if he scores with his legs.
Yeah, and Arthur Smith came out and said something along the lines for the offense, like, it was ugly, but I love it, It was a great game. I felt like we played really well, right? So that's like as Arthur Smith as it gets. I just don't think that there's much upside here from a passing game perspective for Fields if they are going to use him as a runner and they're going to try and ground him out. So obviously, like you said, there is some upside there, but I do think also that he's going to be replaced by Wilson. I know a lot of people think that he's going to keep the job because they're winning, but I don't. So I'm definitely hesitant on Justin Fields. Number 23, Trevor Lawrence. So a lot of people are probably going to see this and say it should be way higher than this. He's QB 15 through 2 games. He's really not doing that bad, but I think he is. Christian Kirk having 2 catches through 2 weeks is not something I saw coming. Ryan Thomas Jr. is really the only bright spot here. I know Gabe Davis has done okay. Showed a little consistency through 2 weeks. Not something we're used to from Gabe Davis, but I do think that Lawrence overall is just trending down, and I just don't have a lot of confidence in him. You guys, if you've been watching this channel, know that I do not like Trevor Lawrence, so it's just way too easy for me right now to put him down here because I just don't have any interest in playing him. I'd much rather pick up Dalton and play him if you have Lawrence as your number 2.
Yeah, and Buffalo's better than any team in the league at stopping the deep ball. And like you mentioned with Brian Thomas Jr. being really the only bright spot from a pass catching perspective, and that's kind of his specialty. So assuming they're able to neutralize him, I think this could be a real stinker from Lawrence. And moving on to number 24, Caleb Williams. Pretty tough start to his NFL career. I know they squeaked by and won that first game, but that was on the back of their defense and special teams. Their interior offensive line looks really rough, and it's going to be hard to see too much improvement from Caleb, given the way he's under pressure constantly, which is pretty disappointing to see because it's typical Chicago not addressing specific areas of need on the offensive line. But hopefully Keenan comes back healthy. We know he's got great weapons, but I think the offensive coordinator is going to need to design some more layup routes to get the ball in his playmakers' hands. DJ Moore is an excellent yards after catch guy. I think we can manufacture him some, quick slants over the middle. Maybe they can start to get the wheels moving a little bit. But for now, it's like I just don't see a whole lot of upside with Caleb, which is very unfortunate because he was being pushed high up the draft boards. And that was kind of one of the things that we talked about quite a bit. How when you're ranking quarterbacks or specifically rookie quarterbacks for SuperFlex, it's so much different because in single QB leagues, if you took Caleb Williams, you could have just picked up Baker off the waiver wire, no big deal. But in SuperFlex, if you draft a guy like this as your 1 or even your 2, there's a lot of risk involved. And we're kind of seeing that play out on the field.
Yeah, and it's just rough, right? I mean, he was going in the top 12 some places, in the top 15, and it's like, we warned you. And obviously it didn't work out with Jaden Daniels. He's looked okay so far, but Caleb, unfortunately, it's just, I don't know what's going on with the offensive coordinator here. Like, how many times are they going to run stretch runs with DeAndre Swift where he gets blown up 3 yards in the backfield? Like, I'm just sick of this offense, how the offensive coordinator seems to be calling the game. So hopefully you're right, and he gets a little bit more layup routes, and they get some quick hitters and can get the ball out of his hands a little faster. But I don't know. It's looked so bad through 2 weeks. I mean, they're not even getting it to Rome Odunze, who is supposed to be just as good as Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors as a prospect. Like, maybe not quite to that elevation, but I mean, he's a top 10 draft pick. Like, you would think if Keenan Allen goes out that there's especially since Keenan didn't practice all week. Like, I know Odunze's banged up in his own right, but like, at least get him 5 targets, 6 targets, like, see what he can do here. So yeah, very down on Caleb Williams. And I do still have a hope here, right? Don't get cute and drop him. And if you want to start him, I understand. But again, if you can get Dalton on your team, I would start Dalton over him. Again, I think that's why I pushed Dalton up to 20, just because I do think this week, again, the veteran Canales believes in Dalton, or there's no way he would have made that switch this early in the year. So another guy that I just think you got to take a wait and see approach, even in SuperFlex. All right, so let's get into kind of rapid fire here now. We got through 24, so that covers our starters in 12-team leagues. So the rest of these guys, unfortunately, are not considered starters for us. Obviously, some of you are going to have these guys as your second quarterbacks because of where they were drafted. But let's get into rapid fire here, starting with Aaron Rodgers. He had a pretty good bounce back week, scored 2 touchdowns, but until that connection with Garrett Wilson looks a little bit better, and until Garrett Wilson has a really big game, I'm not going to be pushing Aaron Rodgers up the rankings at all. He's going to be sitting down here until we see Garrett Wilson start to break out.
Yeah, number 26, Matthew Stafford. Their offensive line is a complete mess right now. They're obviously missing Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, so he's just in a really, really tough position. He's got the Niners, who are obviously a good defense, although Darnold just put up pretty big numbers against them. But this is going to be a real test of Sean McVay's creativity and play design, because he is going to need to get some quick passes to guys that can hopefully make plays. I know right now everyone's kind of hot waiver wire target is deciding which Rams wide receivers you want. Maybe the answer is none of them. We'll see, but I expect a pretty low performance from Stafford this week, unfortunately.
Number 27, we got Will Levis. I do like that he was much better in week 2 than in week 1. He showed some rushing upside. He hit Calvin Ridley on probably the catch of the year so far. That was an unbelievable play. I thought it got picked when I saw it initially. But then Ridley came down with it on the right front pylon. So good throw there. Obviously, we talked about him as having upside and downside throughout the process. So hopefully more of that upside starts to show.
28, Daniel Jones. He had a good week against the Commanders on the back of Malik. But again, it was the Commanders. Anybody can put up numbers against them. I would expect him to come back down to earth this week against Cleveland, and I would still anticipate him getting benched sooner than later.
Jacoby Brissett, somebody that, just is kind of a filler and a holding the water until Drake May takes over. But they've looked pretty good. They're 1-1. They could have been 2-0 as well if they had just been able to kind of finish off the Seahawks there this past week. But I'd rather take a shot on anybody else for some upside. And these guys below him, right? Obviously, Willis and Thompson are, injury fixes, and Bo Nix just looks terrible. So, Brissett kind of just is default here.
Yeah, so with Nix, no surprise, he's thrown 4 picks through 2 games with no touchdowns. If you guys have been listening to us throughout the pre-draft process, you name it. Just can't say enough bad things about Bo Nix as a player. Seems like a really nice guy, though. Maybe he puts up some decent yardage against the Bucs in this game. The Bucs have given up the 4th most pass yards in the league. A lot of that's just because they've been playing in some pretty high point total games. But his current projection is like 192 pass yards, and I would take the under on that all day.
Yeah, and with Nix too, he's this year's Kenny Pickett, right? Lit up the preseason. Everybody thought, okay, we're going to have a better offense here than we thought. And then he's been just atrocious once the season started. Just another reminder to not buy into quarterback play in the preseason. Number 31, Malik Willis, honestly got the Packers a win. I'm a Packer fan, so I was talking to a lot of my friends, like if Love goes on IR and they play 4 games, like Packers are going 0-4 with Willis, and he won them the game against Indy. He wasn't asked to do too much, obviously, with Jacobs having 32 carries, right? They just kind of leaned on him big time, but Willis had some rushing yards. He was 12 for 14. It was the first time he's ever gone over 100 passing yards in a game. So, good for him there, but not somebody I'm interested in starting. If you want to pick him up, if you're a Jordan Love owner, just as a little bit of assurance, you can, but I do think that there's a chance this is going to be the last week he starts.
Rounding out the list, number 32, Skyler Thompson. My only hope with Skyler Thompson is that, Coach McDaniels can design a decent game where he can get the ball in his playmakers' hands very quickly. We know a quick slant to Waddle or Tyreek or Achane can go for a very long way. So I think he carries a little bit more upside than guys like, Bo Nix or Jacoby Brissett. But this is just kind of like Tua is hurt and I need to start someone in my SuperFlex spot and need a Hail Mary here.
And if you're still with us and you're interested in this Miami situation because Tua did just go on injured reserve, I would be making a move to try and get Tyler Huntley on my team. If you are struggling this much where you're actually starting Skyler Thompson and there's that thin of quarterback position on the waiver wire, go get Tyler Huntley, because I think this is probably the last week Skyler Thompson's going to be starting, and that Huntley will probably take over as the starter starting in week 4.
Good point.
All right. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Later.